Well, hi there, everybody. It's Mr. Verzat. So let's get started with the easiest thing, first of all. How do the computers work here? This is all the hardware that you guys are going to use. You've got these iMacs in the classroom, and they are awesome. If you've never used a Mac before, we'll talk about how that works here as well. You'll also have your Chromebook, and as a requirement for the course, every student needs to have a thumb drive, at least 4 gigabytes, okay? You also have your own Gmail and Google Drive accounts. We will be creating all of our work on the iMacs. Your Chromebook will serve as a supplement in order to gather more material. Now, one important thing about web access is that the internet is a huge asset in the course, but we don't use the internet to look for assets or to get on the internet to search for pictures or anything. You have very restricted access, not only through the school's firewall, but I personally made sure that the parental controls and all these are so tight that the only 2 areas that you can generally get to are your Gmail accounts and your Google Drives. You can get through like on a Google image search to look for a couple different images, but mostly everything's going to be blocked out. If for some reason you need to get into a specific website through this iMac, which should be either rare or never, then just see me and I can unlock it temporarily for you. So if the internet's so restricted, how in the heck do you get enough assets to build any piece of artwork? That's where your Chromebook comes in. All of you guys have access to the internet. Now your Chromebook has some restrictions on it through the firewall, but they are nowhere near as tight as mine. Saving work is very critical here. It's a requirement that you back your work up on your thumb drive and on your Google Drive every day in class. And students get those assets. For example, let's say you want to get onto Google Images and you find an image that you really like, but it's blocked on this computer. Well, then try it on your Chromebook. And if you find it on your Chromebook, take your thumb drive, jam it into your Chromebook, save the image to your thumb drive. Pull out your thumb drive, stick it in the iMac, and transfer the image that way. Another way that works as well is to save it in your Google Drive. And then if you're logged into your Google Drive on your iMac, just pull it out of your Google Drive right into your desktop. If you find that the restrictions on your Chromebook are following to your house, then if you have a computer at your house, use your thumb drive or your Google Drive to get whatever assets you need from your home computer and then bring them to school either again through your thumb drive or Google Drive. One example that I see every day are fonts, different types of text fonts. So if you want a specific kind of font, most of those websites are blocked, even by me. I can't access them through our school's firewall. So most of the fonts that I need to find, I get them from home. You turn your work in by sharing it with me on the Google Drive. Or if for some reason that's not working well, then you can attach it to an email from your computer and send it to me. That's how I grade my work. So to access your Google Drive, you can log into it using your email account or your email credentials. I'm going to log into my Google Drive. I have my email up, and how you access that is you just click on the waffle right here, click on Drive, and if you're logged into your email already, it'll take you straight to your G Drive. How do you set your G Drive up? So I see a lot of you guys' screens, you have it in this mode, where it's in list mode. That doesn't give you very much flexibility in terms of dragging and dropping and moving things. So in this class, make sure that you are set to thumbnail mode. So then you can actually grab something, drag it into a file, see what that something looks like, and so on. So here's how you share or turn in your work. Let's say we're going to turn this document in to me, your teacher. All you do is right or control click on the document, click on share, and then enter the email address of me. You can find that email address in your syllabus. All right, you guys, let's get into Photoshop. Photoshop is a tremendously diverse and awesome piece of software. It's professional grade, meaning that it has with it a level of complexity that is uncommon in a lot of the different classes that you have that have some form of software attached to them. There oftentimes are classes entirely devoted to teaching this software. So in this class, not only are you learning graphic design and also design principles and fundamentals, but you're also learning how to use this software, which makes it almost like a double class. So it's very, very challenging. but don't be intimidated by it. All of this is learnable. So what I'd like to show you before we get deep into how it works is how Photoshop operates. There are two types of images in graphics nowadays, mostly. There is what's called a raster image and a vector image. Raster images rely on resolution and pixels to generate the actual imagery. So here we have what's called a bitmap image, and that's another name for raster. And so we have several pixels, and some pixels indicate green while others indicate white, and that creates this type of a circle shape. Raster images typically have a photographic quality to them. What I've done is I've taken this image of Stallone and I ran him through another program called Adobe Illustrator, and I want to show you what the difference between vector and raster looks like. This is the exact same image converted into a vector image. If we get really, really close, look at what happens to his face. We have a series of large clusters or blobs of different color. We could zoom even closer and closer and closer, and not once do we get any jagged lines or pixeled edges. This is as far in as we can zoom on this image. Now let's look at this raster image of Stallone. Let's zoom in closer, closer. Now we're starting to blur. Now we're starting to pixelate. And if we keep going in and in and in, we can see that now it's just a big conglomeration of different colored skin tones. Why does this matter? Well, because raster images, when they're enlarged, start to lose legibility. They start to pixelate. Vector images, when they're enlarged, can go up to the size of like a 5,000 story building, and they will still look just as crisp. Now there's a trade-off. Here's a comparison of vector imagery versus bitmap. You can get a wide variety of different special effects, glows, all sorts of really neat, realistic imagery using raster. Now with vector, you can still achieve the same type of imagery, except it has almost a cartoony, almost a very crisp and colorful look to it. Vector images appear to be illustrations. Raster images oftentimes are photographs or even paintings. One looks real and natural. The other, vector, looks artificial and computer generated. So as you can see, there's a time for both. Sometimes you may need vector imagery that's crisp and clear, for example with logos. Sometimes you might need raster imagery that is very realistic, such as when you're photo bashing or creating images that use creative use of special effects and photography. All right, let's get into the Photoshop interface. Before you look at this and freak out, just know we are not going to use every single tool that's in Photoshop. What we will use are a series of tools, and we're going to use them at different layers of complexity. That's exactly what makes Photoshop so special. Layers. You saw this window a little earlier when I was messing around with things. A layer can be thought of as a transparent sheet of glass that you draw on. Now that sheet of glass can be picked up and moved around, and it takes with it everything that's on that layer. So if we go back to this little illustration that I have several layers that I can turn on and off. If I were to turn every single one of these layers on, it would look pretty messy. So this is your layer window right here. Your layer window has a couple areas that I really want you to pay attention to in these early stages, and later on in the year we'll get a lot more detailed in how to use this. But on this left side, if you click on these boxes, you'll see a little eyeball. That represents visibility of the layer. You're switching it on and off. If you have an image where there are a ton of layers on here and you don't know which is which, you can find out quickly by just clicking one of the layers on and off. And if that's the one that you're looking for, good. You can click directly on that layer now and use a tool to move it around and mess with it. If you want to make a new layer, right next to the garbage can, you have this little piece of white paper with the corner folded over. That's called Create a New Layer. And in Photoshop, you can hover the mouse over any tool, wait a couple of seconds, and it'll tell you what it is. And also the keyboard shortcut to access that tool. So if we click on this, you can see it says Layer 11. I can slowly double click on the name of it and put a name inside of that layer. Here's a tool that's fun to use. I hit the letter B for brush on my keyboard, and it highlighted this tool. You can click on these. This is called your toolbar. And using the brush tool, let's make a squiggle. Right up here at the very top of your toolbar, this is called the Move tool. I can grab this layer. It doesn't matter where I click on the image. I can grab the layer and move it around. Remember, it's like a sheet of glass. So what I want to show you is what's called layer order. This squiggle is on top of layer 10, which is this guy. Okay? If I change the layer order, I can click and drag a layer and put it underneath layer 10. And now layer 10 is what's on top of the squiggle. As a general rule of thumb, when you're building something in Photoshop, do it in a new layer. That's called non-destructive editing. If you work in one layer for everything and you turn it into your boss, and your boss says something like this, "Hey, that's a great design. Hey, can you make the t-shirt green instead of red?" And now you've merged all your layers together, okay, then you're not going to be able to go and change the t-shirt because everything's fused together. That's why always work in new layers. There also are times when you want to fuse your layers together just to make your workflow a little bit easier. What I like to do is something like this. Let's look at this icon over here. It looks like a folder. I can click on this, and that creates what's called a group. I can slowly double click on this group, and I can call it anything, like blah, 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 blah. I can click and drag a layer into that folder group, and you see it gets indented a little bit over here. Well, we can also click the top layer under the group, scroll all the way down, hold down Shift and Shift click and highlight all of those layers, and then click and drag them in one big mass. This little arrow right here collapses the group down. Here's a fun little trick for you. If you want to work on one layer but still have the ability to go back and do other things, then what you can do is highlight your group, right click on it, or control click if you're on that Mac, duplicate the group. It'll ask you what you want to call it. All right, and so now look, you've got two groups of the same thing. In one of the groups, you can shift click everything that's inside that folder and fuse them together. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can fuse them all together by right clicking on any one of these little layers and go merge layers. Or you can even link the layers together. There's a button here that does it for you. Right here it's this chain link. If you link it, then what you do to one layer will happen to all of them. But I'm going to merge it together and see we've got one group with all of our layers, and we've got another group with just one. Now if I continue to work on this one, that will have no effect to everything underneath. So just be mindful of that. If I want to get rid of a layer or even an entire group, it's the same process. You can drag and drop down to your trash can icon, or you can just click on either the layer or the group and click on the trash can. So let's take a look at a tool that's called the pen tool. The pen tool is a way of drawing that is somewhat automated. It uses vector-based calculations between 2 points. Those points are called anchor points. And so with the pen tool selected, that's P for pen, you can create several points, and you have these sort of geometric looking lines. They're called paths. So when you create a path, I can close the path off by hovering over its origin anchor point, and you'll see that there's a little circle right next to the pen. By clicking that, the path is now closed and it's considered to be a shape. There are a few tools up at the top of your toolbar here that are very important. The first is called this little drop-down box. It has path and shape. We're going to have it selected to shape. Next we have fill, and what fill does is exactly what you think it does. It fills in the shape by any type of color that you select. To the side we have one called stroke, and that gives it a stroke of any color that you want. Past that, we've got this little slider that increases the thickness of the stroke. And if we open up one of these menus, let's go to fill. Right over here, this is for filling solids. This is for filling what's called a gradient, and we'll get into that in a future lesson. And this is how you use patterns. If you want to select a color that's not on this little swatch palette, just click on this window, and this is called the color picker. You can scroll between a large family of colors. So if we go to green over here, we can pick anywhere on that spectrum to get the color that we need. Also, if this window is open and you move your mouse over, you get this little eyedropper tool, which if you hover over your canvas, you can click and it will immediately grab the color that you want. Say OK, and that will be set up right there in the computer. Now I'm going to teach you how to use the pen tool. We're going to have our finger on two separate buttons as we do this. Those two buttons are the Command button and the Option button. You can find those to the left or the right of the space bar. The Command button, his job is to be the boss. He tells the anchor points where to go and what to do. And if I hold down Command, my pen icon becomes an arrow. If I click one of these anchor points and then click and drag, I'm commanding it to go places. And you can manipulate the shapes of your forms by manipulating the anchor point's position. Very powerful stuff. If you don't want an anchor point there, just hover your pen tool over that anchor point and you'll see a minus sign show up and it goes away. If you want to add an anchor point, hover over the top of the path and you'll see the plus sign and it adds an anchor point. So you've seen how Command works. Now we're going to switch to Option. Option tells the anchor points how they're to be used. It tweaks them a little bit. And if you hover over an anchor point and hold down the Option button on the keyboard, you get this little wedge tool here. That tool is called a Convert Anchor Point tool. If I click and drag on that anchor point, two little handles show up and it creates what's called a curve. You have geometric anchor points and you have curved anchor points. Now I'm going to switch back to the Command button. I want to move this little guy around and it's the same exact process. With Command held down, you can grab one of the corners of these handles and it rotates both handles, changing the shape of the form, and it does that by changing the path direction. Now I can also grab the handle and extend one side out. I can do the other side. And if I hold down Option, remember it's the one that tweaks and adjusts, and I grab a handle, it will move just that individual handle. So you can go to concave shapes, adjust those curves accordingly. If you want to get rid of one of the handles, just pull it in right to the anchor point. Now let's say you really mess up and you want to start over with these anchors. Well, just hold down Option, click the anchor point, and it reverts it back to the geometric form. And then you can just hold down Option, click and drag, and go right back to your curve. Let's apply this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a picture using the pen tool. This is the basic workflow when using the pen tool that I feel is very comfortable for beginning students. So with my pen tool, I'm going to draw the outside of the toast. So a piece of toast is kind of like a square that caves in on the sides. And now I'm going to manipulate these anchor points. With my Command tool, I'm going to select the anchor points that I need to kind of make just a generally kind of a balanced out image. So start loose and rough and work your way into precise, clean polish last. Let's add some curves in here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to adjust these curves and kind of play with their arrangement a little bit. Now it's starting to look like toast. So let's play with our outer stroke and make it look thick like crust. I'm going to go up to my stroke area over here and let's scale up the thickness of that line. Now let's fill it in with a color for the bread. I'm going to go click on the fill icon and let's find a lighter color for that. So we have the basic outline of a cartoony piece of toast using the pen tool. Let's make it better. Here's a fun little shortcut in Photoshop to make things 3D. Here is my toast layer. What I'm going to do is duplicate that layer, and to make it look like it's three-dimensional, I'm going to have basically two toast layers. Now make sure he's underneath the top piece of toast in your layer order, and already you can see we've got this nice little three-dimensional effect occurring here. You can use your arrow keys to fine-tune and adjust placement. Here's a fun little trick. I want some light to catch the outside edge of where the toast is. If you've taken 2D art or any form of drawing, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But if not, watch this. Double click in this area on your layer palette. It'll bring up this window called Layer Styles. And what Layer Styles do is they add various special effects to the layer. I'm going to click on Stroke. Now if I click on Stroke, in the checkbox, it doesn't look like anything happened. If I click on the word, it opens up like this panel that helps me to manipulate the effect. So I'm going to change to a white stroke. I'm going to make that stroke be outside of the layer. I'm going to increase the thickness of that stroke. And now we've got kind of this outline effect. And let's move this layer around so you can understand what's happened. What it's done is it's drawn a white outline around the layer. And because the background of my canvas is white, it looks like, especially down here, that it fades out. So it's a nice fun effect that you can do to give what's called an offset or a halo effect. All right, let's give it some more detail. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to add like a little bit of light shining on the top. Got my pen tool in my new layer, and again, start with basic geometrics, and then boom. I'm going to change that. I'm going to turn the stroke off, and I just want like a solid color that would work really well for light. So let's get like, let's find like a light tan. And then I'm going to make it even lighter here by manipulating that color a little bit. Place it and arrange it. Let's play with our curves. And now in a new layer, I'm going to add a little area of kind of like shadow inside this toast. Now I think I have two too many anchor points. So I'm going to get rid of this guy, and let's get rid of this guy. And now let's manipulate this curve using only the curve tool. So select this little anchor. Here is our handlebar. And let's play with it like that. I think he's a little bit too dark, so I'm going to take the opacity of this layer, which means basically make the layer more see-through. I'm going to turn that down a little bit, and now we've got this nice kind of cartoony looking toast. I'm going to design a large stack of pancakes with butter and stuff on it. So I'm going to turn off fill, I'm going to turn on stroke just for visibility's sake, and now let's do kind of an oval shape. Now let's make it look 3D. Remember to work non-destructively. If you're ever going to add anything to your work, make sure that you do it in a different layer completely. Now this shape is going to go underneath the pancake, so I'm not really concerned about what's happening up here. These three anchor points down here in the bottom are the ones that I'm worried about. There we go. Now we've got this really ugly shape. I'm going to play with my layer order just so that the dominant shape is in front. And then let's go in and kind of adapt these anchor points here to make it a little cleaner. Now, if we're happy with these, I'm going to put these two in a group. I'm going to call them pancake. And now let's duplicate the group. You can do that by right-clicking and going duplicate group, or just hitting Command-J. And with the move tool, let's take our new group and move them underneath the order, and let's offset them just a little bit like that. And now let's build a nasty block of butter on there. Remember, always do your next change in a different layer. So I've got a new layer, got my pen tool, and so let's do the top plane, which is going to be the part where the light hits. Turn off stroke. Let's go for a lighter color. So I'm going to have a nice light yellow right there. And then let's do another where we do one of these other two planes. One of them is going to be the shadow. There we go, just using the pen tool. And these are each their own individual shapes sandwiched on top of each other. So now let's play around with one other function really quick. I want there to be kind of like a shadow between each of these pancakes. You know, to show that there's difference, like this part sticking out farther than this. Command click and find what layer this guy's on. I'm going to fill him with a gradient that goes from, like, say, a little bit darker brown to a lighter one. Now to find that gradient, you just go to your fill, and instead of going to a solid fill, you just select a gradient. Now you can control those what the gradient looks like here. Here's the first part. See how it's changing to black, and then here's where it's going to end. So I'm going to double click on that, and then color sample, kind of like a darker shade, like right about there. And then for the end of the gradient, I want it to end, obviously, as the color of the pancake, like that. And now we have to control the angle that this little gradient is going to go. So now, playing around with the angle, I'm going to maybe push the gradient so that the dark part comes out a little bit more, like that. Now I ran into a little trouble. You see how we lost the edge of this part of the pancake? Well, let's find what layer that is, and let's put a little outer stroke to separate the two. So I can double click. Here is the layer for that side. Double click, let's give it a stroke. It could be any color you want. It could be white, it could be the color of this pancake here, as a matter of fact. And let's bump up the thickness a little. And so now we kind of have that little color separation between the edge of the pancake and the top. I'm going to do that for the rest of them. So now I'm going to show you how to overlay from a photo reference using the pen tool. We do this very frequently. The goal is exactly the same as you've learned with your traditional skills. Some of you may need to use a reference, and what we're doing is we're not copying the reference, we are taking what we need from it and adapting it to create original work. So how do we take the pen tool to trace this out? And how do we know where to put those anchor points? Well, here's a couple of rules of thumb. First rule is use as few anchor points as possible. Beginning students oftentimes start to do this, where they use tons and tons of anchor points. What you're basically doing is you're showing me, your teacher, that you don't know how to use this tool. The result is going to be a very ugly and jagged line that does not use the curves and is kind of a sloppy, lazy shortcut. That does not show the skill. So here's what you do. We need to know how and where to put the anchor points. So an anchor point goes anytime there's a change in direction on this path. And so this area would be an excellent place to put an anchor point. So we have this wide open curve, and then it changes into a sunken in curve. Where do we put the points on that area? What I'm going to do is put it right at the edge of where the form is going to change, all right? And then you can also put one down here where it changes direction again, so where it sinks in and turns into this little, starts to come back out again. You can put it at where the curve ends as well. So we have this large outward curve, and then down here it kind of stops and then sinks inward. This could be a good place for a point. This could be a good place for a point. As always, start loose and then refine later on. Let's put one here. Let's put one here. Now it's going to sink inward, and so here's where it kind of comes back out. Put one right there. Now we've got a big continuous curve, big one. Where do we put it? We could put it here where it starts to sink in, or we could put it at the halfway point. I'm just going to stick it there for now. We'll see what happens. And then it's going to kind of come back out and then change direction again, like an S. So let's put it here. And then we have a change in direction here. Let's get rid of fill and go to lines so we can clearly see what we're doing. Going to get a little detail, it sinks inward. So let's stick an anchor point at the change of direction, and then finally where it ends, and then let's link them together. I'm going to change all these from geometric to curves. So let's start with this guy. Let's see what happens. So far, pretty good match right here. Now these anchor points share curves. So before I try to change this, let's get this guy curving also. There we go. See how that resolved itself pretty well? Now before we solve this area, let's go and get this guy curving as well. There we go. Coming along. Now this isn't perfect, so I'm going to shrink this little fella down a little bit. Now this is looking good. We might not even have to mess with him. But this fella right here needs a little bit of work. So let's pull this fella out, and holy smokes, what the heck happened here? Well, there's two things we could do. We could pull this little handle in, and there it's fixed, okay? Another thing, we could delete the anchor point, but I don't think that's necessary. Now, before we fix this, let's curve this and see what happens. So far, so good. We're going to do a little adjusting here. Let's pull this out. Let's pull this out. And if it just isn't working, well, you might need another anchor point. But so far, so good. All right, let's get this guy curving. Let's get this guy curving. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see. And a little tweaking and adjusting here. Let's move this anchor point up. Let's play with these and their arrangement a little bit. And let's zoom out and see what we have. Let's turn off the photo. And boom, there is our pear shape. And it looks pretty good. Graphic design is more than just simply tracing and overlaying out from photo references. We need to stylize, we need to enhance, we need to inject creativity and energy into what we make. And simply tracing doesn't do that. Any photocopier can do that. So what was exaggerated? Well, I shrunk the size of the leaf down, I angled and shrunk the size of the stem, and I exaggerated one side of the pear to kind of give it like an accelerated angle. So I hope you found this helpful. I will answer any questions you have in class. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.